All right, welcome back to the podcast, Greg.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm excited.
You are, I appreciate that. I was just telling you, but yeah, evidently all podcasts say that they're excited about things, and so we are. We look forward to these conversations. They're great. And last week we actually talked about convictions, commands, and you mentioned something in the middle of that conversation that I thought would be fun. I would like to hear more from you about it, but it's the word balance.
Yeah.
So in life, we have this little thing called responsibilities, and those things tend to increase, the further, working with college students. College students have responsibilities. They have school, they have family, they have work. But as you get married, you have children, like you have job, it tends to increase. And balance tends to be something that people lose somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
Even your college student can lose balance, right? So I'm just curious from you. Balance is definitely important for all of us, but I'd love to hear more from you. Why is balance a key part of what we need to work on and improve on?
Well, I do think it changes by the age. There are different challenges in different stages, but it's funny how everyone will tell you that they're busy. Everyone's struggling with. I call that balance, because if you're busy, what you're really saying is, I don't necessarily have time to do everything that I want to do, but there's things that I have to do. To me, when someone says, I'm just so busy, again, my assumption means you're out of balance, because you're wearing yourself out, or you're not getting enough sleep, or you're not getting to exercise or recreate, So, and I may be wrong on that. That may not necessarily be what they're saying, but it's just funny. You can talk to a high schooler, college student, young adult, young parent, middle age, everyone's always busy, and that may be, I think to some ways that is a modern affliction. If I do a lot of reading, I love historical stuff, and some people were wired really tight even back in the day. I think it was harder to be busy though, because things took so long to do. Even preparing a meal, you might have been busy working on that meal, but you were busy doing one thing for an hour and a half, or longer in some cases. And so the rhythm of life was different, and it was slower, and we didn't have cell phones and instant entertainment. And so I think busyness and the lack of balance is more of a modern affliction. And I think it's worth talking about, because I just know people who are, they're burning it at both ends, and they're unhappy all the time.
Well, you're right. And I've had to catch myself, because people, hey, how's it going? And you will sometimes, man, a lot going on. And I don't want to say that anymore. It's like, it's we all have things going. And so at some point we do have to slow down. And I remember talking with Dusty after the pandemic hit. Remember, everything shut down, and we got a little bit of that back because everything was stripped away from us. In some ways, that was a blessing to just have a reset. And then I remember somebody, it might have been him, that asked the question, how soon, it's like, a year into it right now, things start picking back up. And how soon before we all go back to just that race that you're describing? Yeah. And I think we're definitely there. Yeah, it's like it never happened.
Everyone listening would agree that life has resumed exactly as it was before COVID began.
And I don't like that. So how do we fix this? Because I want balance. I don't want to feel that. And it's not that we can, I think the immature thing is to want all those things to go away, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if I could just remove all the responsibility, all the things, then life
and not all of that is wrong. Not all of it's bad.
That's right. Some of those things are either God-given, or they're just things that, helping you provide for your family, or whatever it might be, doing fun things for kids, whatever. So what do we do? How do we find balance? I think we recognize we have a problem. Everyone can laugh and agree that, yes, I feel that. I feel like I'm just running and gunning all day, every day. How do we slow down? How do we kind of get that back? How do we redeem that part of life in the midst of, you're right, I mean, even the way we do everything in our society, instant gratification. I mean, Americans in particular, we've perfected that, right? I mean, we that's how we're raised, instant gratification, right? We don't know delayed gratification. Like, what's that? What does it mean to actually wait for something, to wait for a good meal to be prepared? And, we don't know.
Yeah.
It's time to eat. what are we waiting for, right? So,
yeah, we get impatient if it takes 5 minutes at a restaurant. So that's why everybody likes to go to the Mexican restaurants in our town, because they're
that's right.
fast.
They are
get it
fast.
there,
That's right.
So,
And if they're while you're waiting, you got cheese dip.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
I like that.
That's good. Well, I think, I mean, obviously, I'm going to point to Scripture on a lot of this, but it is about, I think balance is the answer to it all, because what you first have to do is identify, what is it in my life that is a command, kind of like last week's conversation. Yep. There are things you're commanded to do. And, if you're an adult male and you have a family, then you need to be a husband, you need to be a father, you need to be a provider. So in my mind, that means non-negotiables are, I'm going to work, I'm going to earn a living, provide for my family, and then I'm going to, nurture the relationship I have with my wife and nurture the relationship I have with my kids. Those are commands. Now, how you flesh them out, going to be some nuance, and that's, everybody may have a different conviction about how they spend their time, but you've got to know what your commands are, and then you've got to identify the things you're doing that are negotiable in a sense. If you're busy and a bulk of your time is spent doing something that's not a command, then I would encourage somebody to evaluate, okay, am I really spending my time wisely doing that? And I don't necessarily want to throw out a bunch of examples, because I'm not trying to pick on anybody, and again, I'm talking about things that are neutral. If you play golf 40 hours a week and you don't have time for your wife and your children, you're going from the workplace to the golf course, and you say, man, I'm so busy. My first question is going to be, well, why are you spending 40 hours playing golf?
Then we have this phrase, out of balance, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where golf's not necessarily, it's not evil, it's not wicked. It's a neutral thing. I mean, it can be healthy, restorative in cases, but 40 hours, unless you're on the PGA Tour, don't give me that,
If you're earning a living through it, okay. All right, let me ask you this, because it feels like, even in my life, I've seen this temptation. I've talked to others. It feels like this is a real temptation. When you recognize, all right, there's a lot going on, you kind of got to whittle stuff down. Learn to say no. Right? That's the thing, right? You can't say yes to everything. You can't do it all. So you got to cut things. But it tends to be that we can make a mistake that the first things that tend to go, if we're trying to get back into balance, we'll cut the spiritual things.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Why is it that, do you see the same thing? I might be off on that. It just feels like that's sometimes what people cut, whether it's going to church on Sundays or time in the Word, just time with God on any given day. It's like, I can cut that quick, but I'll be committed to the other things, but I can cut the spiritual stuff quickly.
I think that's true. I guess it's something you'd expect a pastor to say, probably, but I think that is the natural response to the world that we live in, and the way we like to have maybe our ego stroke, and even the kind of legacy we want to leave. I mean, there's something in our culture that, if we have to burn it at both ends at work, we'll do that, because there's a reward there. We're going to get celebrated by our coworkers. We're going to move up the food chain. We're going to get paid more. We're going to get overtime. Instant gratification to some degree. And so we'll never question someone who works 60 hours a week. And so that makes it easier. I think if you buy into that being the most valuable thing, then what goes? Well, then my time with the Lord, my quiet time, my church attendance. And I think even, we talked a little bit about kids' ball, the crazy recreational world we live in today. It's almost, it's assumed that your kids will be playing ball all over the place, and that, a good parent loads them up and drives them everywhere and spends the weekend and wherever. Yeah. And again, in that model of life, it makes perfect sense to kill church. And, that's where, again, I would start the conversation with, you got to figure out what the commands are, and I think being healthy spiritually, you want to have balance, you want to enjoy life, you want to win on this side of eternity, you've got to have a healthy spiritual life. And of course, it's legalism to say, well, you can never miss church. Maybe you have a conviction that you'll never miss church, but I would never tell somebody they should never miss church. Yeah. But if you're at the ball field,
I'm going on vacation in a few weeks, and I think we're missing Sunday. We'll be gone, and I don't actually plan to go to church that Sunday. Is that okay?
It's okay by me. I
actually heard a story where there was a pastor who demanded that if his staff was on vacation, that they had to make sure they went to church
Yeah.
on Sunday. That felt a little weird to me.
It's weird to me because you're probably like me. If I go to another church, I'm still working because in my brain,
That's right.
I'm trying to worship, don't get me wrong, but I'm thinking, well, why do they do that?
You're evaluating.
There was nobody there to greet me. I mean, I'm evaluating the whole time.
One of the coolest experiences, it was so healthy for me working with college students. I went to church by myself. There was a wedding on a Sunday, so I went up Saturday night, and I was like, it wasn't until Sunday night. I thought, I'll go to church Sunday morning. And it was hard. It was like, I get it. It's hard to find a church. It's hard to go somewhere when you're by different conversation.
Yeah.
But yes, your point. But I was in that mindset. That's what I'm saying, sharing that for.
Yeah.
I was in the kind of a work mindset. So, well, I like there's freedom there. Well, balance is important. I feel like it's easy to get out of balance. Is part of it perspective? Is part of it reminding ourselves? I think maybe, you always look back on things that a hard thing like the COVID pandemic and all the insanity of that. You can always look back and learn from it. And one thing that it reminded of us, just like anything can in life, is that life is short. Like, is part of the problem we always assume there's tomorrow, so I can just go, and I'll do these other things at some other time. Like we tend to put off, I don't know if that changes things or not, but we tend to have a pattern of behavior of we always assume there's tomorrow, and so I'll do that stuff later.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's the both and this is where the lack of balance comes from. We either think, well, there's always tomorrow, and we put it off, or we get caught up in that rat race. Well, it's got to happen now. It's got to happen now. And I think people tend to be in both camps. And I think probably early in my marriage, probably after we'd had Grace, our daughter, I really began to get challenged. If you look at Jesus in Scripture, it's astonishing to me. He knew when he came that he had 33 years. I mean, I don't think there's any, I'm not falling into a theological ditch to know.
Yeah.
Jesus knew his days were numbered.
Yeah.
And I would argue he kept saying, now is not my time. Now is not my time. I think he knew when his time was, So he knew he had a fixed number of days. He knew how many they were. Most of us would say 33 is not very many, even as messed up as we are, our life expectancy is more than double that. So he had a fixed number of days. He knew it from the beginning. It's the Son of God incarnate. He gets to do this one time. He's establishing a church that's going to exist for, I assume, eternity, and yet what I see is that Jesus was never busy. Jesus never told somebody, I don't have time for this. Jesus never was like, well, I can't pray today because I got to go do this. I mean, you never see this anxiety in Christ that is, I think, indicative of our society, where we're constantly, we got to go from one thing to the next thing, we don't have time for people, and we're always anxious about it. And or the other ditch, which is, I need to sleep until noon and catch up for maybe missed time, and you're so out of balance physically that then you're a zombie for it's, as busy in a sense that Jesus was always harassed in a sense by other people, yet I never see him exasperated. I never see him frazzled, and that challenges me because, again, not to get into a big deep theological argument, but he was fully God, but he was also fully man, which means it is possible to be a man and get the right amount of rest and to spend your time with the Father and pray and be spiritually prepared and to do those things you need to do and not act like you're so busy your head's going to fall off. Yeah. And there's something in our society that it's almost like you win an award if you're stacking up bricks faster than everybody else, and you can make it sound like, well, man, I got so much done today and I don't know when I'm going to get some sleep. And it's like Jesus didn't do any of that. Yeah. And so I was challenged. If I'm feeling that, or if I'm aspiring to that, I'm wrong. Because Jesus didn't do that, and he's the model. And so, I had to start making some decisions early in my, certainly being married and with children and having a full-time job, like what's going to go. Because I don't think being busy wins any awards in heaven. I don't think the Lord is pleased.
You're saying you had some things that was one question that popped up as you're talking. It's like, how do I know if I'm out of balance? And I'm hearing you share some things. You had some things in place that let me know, wait a second, I'm finding myself a little off right now. I got to get back.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of that's simple physical, whether it's anxiety or lack of sleep or, putting on weight. I mean, anxious eaters or no exercise. There's lots of things that'll show you're physically out of balance. Spiritually is a little harder to measure, but it's the lack of spiritual disciplines that'll tell you you're out of balance spiritually.
Well, that's, you've got kind of 4 elements, and maybe I'm missing one, but you got, that we've hit on spiritual, physical, and then you got like mental, emotional. Learning to be balanced, not just in one of those, but all of those, right? I mean, that can be tough, because it does feel like, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I feel like part of this discussion is a reality of a spiritual war, saying if he can get us just off kilter on any one of those, multiple ones, great, but just one of them can really kind of derail us from the others. And so I do feel like it's a healthy conversation. How do you feel like we can, because in my life, it's like, physically, I'm not eating healthy, I'm not exercising, I gotta get this in balance. And so you start putting focus there, and all of a sudden the other 3 start getting neglected. Right? So like I feel like there's tension here, because you're trying, but there's 4 things that help make us up and help us to. The biggest thing I heard you saying was that if I'm in that busy mode, I'm not fully present right here, right now. Yeah. Because we're so it's something ahead, something behind. We're just rarely in the moment. And I feel like that is an art. And some days I have good days, but how do we, if we recognize being out of balance in one area, but knowing there's those 3 others, what are some things that you've learned that can kind of help you? Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, we're kind of saying it is about balance, that I think you have to realize there are multiple areas of my life that I have to win in. Okay. And the enemy wants you to isolate on one thing. And, we see it like, I'm an old runner. I ran lots of mileage in high school and college, and there's something I'd be wired to go back to that. But the marathon craze that everyone gets into, and people who've never ran a day in their life, suddenly they want to run a marathon, or they want to do a half. Of course, we've sponsored a half here in Russellville, and I'm like, there's no balance there. You've never ran a day in your life. Just try to walk a 5K, let's start baby steps. Yeah. And trust me, the reality is you can't have balance in the rest of your life if you're training for a marathon. Something's got to die. Because we weren't built to run marathons, not competitively, certainly, So how much training time is it going to take for you to be really good at running a marathon? Well, you're going to have to run a lot. And so, I know some runners that have balance, but their lives are really simple. They train and it's good for them emotionally, but they don't have 12 hobbies they're balancing that, things have to go. And I think that's the biggest challenge in this is you got to identify the things that God in your season of life requires you to do and to win at. Being a dad, being a husband, for me being a pastor, everything else is really gravy after that. So those things must be my priority. I must prioritize around that. And like the elements of life you're talking about, spiritual, physical, emotional, I've got to watch, because the enemy wants me to get out of balance, and he wants me to put too much emphasis on one of those areas, or self-pity is a big one too. He wants you to feel so discouraged and so depressed and so tired that you don't do anything. Those are the pits that you fall in, and it's so easy to fall in both. And so for me, that's why I keep coming back to Jesus. I'm like, I know he was tired, but he never complained about being tired. He didn't wear it like a badge of honor and drag into church. I got to go back to the synagogue today. But he also was never like, I'm sorry, you possessed by demons and I could do something for you, but I don't have time to do that. I've got to go do this miracle over here. It's just, we cannot be like that, because we've been sucked into the society that we're a part of, and we want to be the best at everything, and or we're dealing with our misery and anxiety and depression, and we just want to lay in bed all day. And
are people by nature just kind of extreme on either end, do you think?
I think it's very, very rare.
For example, like the people who want to get healthy, like they recognize that I'm out of shape, this is not good. And so then they put all their eggs in the basket of got to get healthy. And that's great. But the problem is they totally disengage from those other 3 things we mentioned. So physically, okay, great. So a year down the road, they're in great shape, but at the cost of their spiritual, mental, and emotional health.
I would argue that it's a result of the curse. Balance. That's why this is a spiritual conversation to me. Jesus shows us what balance looks like, and I do not believe an individual can be properly balanced without a personal relationship with the Lord. And then if you have a relationship with the Lord, you're going to have to let Him navigate you. How much time do I put here or there? There's some people in the world that may look balanced to us, but if they don't know the Lord, then we know they're not healthy spiritually.
Yeah.
So something's dying, the flesh is winning somewhere. So I would say by nature, the sin nature gets us out of balance. We're going to fall in a ditch.
That's a great statement.
Don't just say, well, this is how I'm made. 98% of the time when someone says, well, this is just how I'm made, I think, okay, you're defending some sin in your life because
they're giving into the curse. They're not wrong. But it's like, what's the response to that?
You have a proclivity there. Ding, 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 ding. Bad.
Doesn't mean we just go, I guess that's just the way it is. It's like, no, there's a different response to that we can have.
Yeah.
That sends us a right and good and holy and honorable direction. I like that. How about it just as a church member? What would you say to the church? We have a lot of activities. We have things happening all the time. How do you find balance as a church member? You want to be a healthy church member. You want to be engaged. Obviously we don't want to be legalistic with things, but how do we do that well?
Yeah.
Is that a fair question?
Again, that's why we're having a great conversation on balance because, I know with our kids, they're growing up in a pastor's home, but I did not want them to grow up with that legalistic mindset of if we miss church, we're going to hell. That's not biblical, okay? So first, I feel like you have to find a way to communicate. There are spiritual disciplines. There's things we do to be intimate with the Lord. Being a part of a church is good and healthy. The New Testament has no picture of spirituality that doesn't involve engagement in a local body. I mean, it's just a part of the New Testament.
Yeah.
Once you get past the Gospels, everything's about the local church. So we know the local church has its place, but at the same time, it cannot save you. It does not redeem you. It is a part of what we're supposed to be about, but it can't be everything that we are. And so first, I think you got to communicate that. That was maybe more of a concern for a guy, like us who's in the ministry, because we're going to naturally.
We could easily have them here every time.
We could make it an idol, and we could make it feel like we're better than everybody
maybe
else.
Unintentionally. It's our job.
You have to intentionally communicate. It is not the end all of our spirituality. It's a tool. I mean, it's a part of a healthy expression. But then I think the other thing comes in, and that's where the ball games and everything. If your kids, before God in a courtroom, would testify that you put more value on them being at their ball game or their ball tournament than you do on church attendance, then you're out of balance. Because I think no matter, again, there's not a magic number how many Sundays you miss, how many Wednesdays you miss. This is what I know. Your children growing up in a godly home with a godly legacy and being spiritually minded, that's where you win.
Yeah.
And you can win with, a kid learning how to play t-ball and a kid learning how to play competitive basketball and a kid do it. They can do that and you can still model it right spiritually for them. Yeah. But everyone's going to have to figure out how do I navigate that. And I think we've got a generation that honestly their kids are in their 20s and they're walking away from church. And part of it's because they would say, well, I know what won. I mean, in my home, sports always won. Church didn't matter. So what a shock. They're 25, they're 26, they're going, church doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, whether their parents said that or not, that's what they communicated by the choices they were making. Again, we're not guaranteed that our kids will value church like we value church, but if your lives have enough balance to make church seem important, they're going to have to make hard choices when they're in their 20s and they start organizing their life.
That's good. Well, I love that. And, it's funny. I feel like this is new, the whole travel thing. I told our kids, travel ball starts whenever the school starts telling you traveling. To me, that's pretty simple, but that's, I'm not saying if people do travels, that's fine. Each to their own, like you said, you admitted, you can do that and honor God and find a way, but there's tests in there to kind of know. So I love that conversation, man. That's helpful. And I appreciate the balance because I do feel like we live in a world where it's hard to maintain balance and no one's doing that. you do need the freedom to say no to stuff. And I hear you saying that part of balance is that even if I have a routine, it's okay to break that routine at times.
Yeah, it can be healthy.
It can be healthy. Like I've seen that. So obviously working here and being a pastor here, there's very few Sundays I can miss, but there are some that we do. So we'll say, hey, we're not going to go to church today. We'll put it on the TV. We're going to, and I found that interesting. We don't do that a lot, but obviously we have responsibilities here. But I've seen, to your point, in a small way, that's helped my kids realize, like, okay, all right, good. And I'm trying to help them see, like you said, I'm trying to do things to help establish some balance in their life. Same thing with if I'm pushing them to, okay, so my boys do martial arts, and there are some days where they don't want to go. And I feel like part of this is an opportunity to push them to do things when they don't want to do it, because I think there's a real value in that life lesson. Like, I know you don't want to do this right now, but that's exactly why you need to do it. Now, 2 weeks later, same conversation, can we skip today? I'm like, you know what? Let's skip today. Let's just skip today. Let's do it. Let's do it. So I'm trying, man, but it is hard. And, I think that maybe just hearing you talk is that part of it, that if I'm always the person that we have to be here, and I might be off track. Maybe on times it's okay to be like, sure.
Well, that sounds like a personal conviction, not, if that's always the answer, that's not balance. That's not Jesus. That's not the Holy Spirit. I think you've created a rule to make your life simplistic. And most of the time when you do that, you're straying into legalism. And it may work for you, but it may be really hard on one of your kids because of difference in personality or whatever it may be. And so, I'm just always, older I get, the more I'm just scared of rigid, hard rules, because I think, that doesn't sound like what Jesus, Jesus had balance, Again, you don't mess with commands. You don't mess with things that are clear. Those are non-negotiables. But if you start making rules of everything else, you're going to get out of balance. So,
well, I like that. And I think it's a healthy conversation. I certainly challenge anyone listening, it's hard because this conversation doesn't necessarily go, oh, here, we're going to solve. No, like that's not. But I feel like the point is, like, even for me, it helps me get my attention to go, okay, am I living like in the moment right now, or am I always just thinking of what's next? Because if I'm always thinking of what's next, I'm in the busy mode. This should get my attention that I've got to change something because I'm out of balance. I can't be right where I'm at ever, whether that's at home with my kids, at like wherever that is. You've got to engage in that moment, and busyness will keep you from that. Yeah. So there are things from this conversation that I think someone could do some digging, could get with God on, and certainly pay attention. And that's what I love about who God is. His Holy Spirit, He'll lead you. He'll show you.
If not, just evaluate every once in a while. Just don't run the rat race. Don't do it over. Don't wait 10 years to look back and go, man, was I balanced? When my children were young.
Yep.
Ask the question.
Because it's never too late.
That's right.
To get back in balance.
That's right.
So, well, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for sharing. And hopefully there is some truth or wisdom found in this conversation. Not from us, of course, but we're leaning to God and His Word and His wisdom. And as you said, the example of Jesus that He gave. So thank you, my brother. Until next time.
Yes, sir.
God bless you guys.